I was thrown out of my own beach house by my daughter-in-law. She stood in my doorway, wearing my apron, sipping from my favorite mug, and called me a parasite, while her relatives trampled the geraniums I planted with my bare hands. Loud music shook the walls I paid for stitch by stitch, year after my husband died. Children I didn't know were kicking a ball against my chairs. Strangers were sleeping in my bed. When I said, "This is my house," she laughed and said my son gave her permission, and there was no room for me, no room. In the home I built from grief and grit, I walked away without crying, but I took pictures, I took notes, and I took back my breath. Because if they think an old woman will bow to humiliation, they have never met the woman who carried sand-mixed paint and signed every bill. Hear what I found upstairs next. It clung to my skin like sea salt, stinging every old scar I earned alone. I stood there with the keys that paid for this doorway, keys bought with needle pricks and double shifts, and watched a stranger married to my son square her shoulders as if the deed were in her name. Parasite. As if I hadn't carried a family on my back through winters of unpaid bills and summers of overtime. As if grief hadn't been my foreman and hunger my clock. I tasted iron in my mouth, not from fear, but from an old discipline waking. Parasite gnome. I am the foundation, the mortgage, the paint under their greasy fingerprints. I am the woman who wrote checks in shaking hands and still signed straight. They wanted me to shrivel. Instead, I cataloged faces, voices, details. I let the insult settle, then harden, then become a tool. Parasites don't build. Builders remember. My geraniums fat with color, fed with coffee grounds, and patience leaned like exhausted soldiers. A soccer ball bounced off a chair I scrubbed every spring, leaving a wet slap across the weave. Someone had dropped a skewer near the rosemary. Flies were already feasting. I could tell which hands had never pruned a branch by the way they tore leaves to test their smell and let them fall. In the corner, plastic cups bred a sticky nation of ants, while laughter rose from my terrace like smoke. Not a single voice said, "Careful, this belongs to her." They behaved like tourists granted immunity. But I counted sins, patiently crushed petals, overturned pot's sunscreen stripes on the rail. Muddy footprints on the steps. When you love a garden, you read it like a face. Mine told me the truth. Disrespect blooms faster than weeds if you water it with entitlement. I breathed in slow and memorized the damage. I built it from the life left after the funeral, from the ache that either drowns you or teaches you to breathe under. My sewing machine sang through the years like a factory caged in a kitchen, and every hem meant groceries. Every wedding dress meant one more tile, every altered uniform meant a bill paid on time. While others slept, I measured. While others hosted, I hustled. While others pitied, I planned. This house did not happen because someone felt generous. It happened because I refused to be fragile. I chose cream walls so the light could forgive me on hard mornings. I planted shade where the afternoon burned. I learned where the roof complains when storms bully. Widowhood is a ruthless accountant. It tallies what you can live without and what you must protect with teeth. I did not choose loneliness, I chose ownership. And ownership once learned is a language you never unlearn. His head fit beneath my chin once before pride outgrew tenderness. He used to say, "Mom, your hands are magic." They were not magic. They were blistered, cracked, and stained, but they never shook when it was time to hold a line straight. I see us again, a younger me, hauling sand by the bag, a younger him laughing at the wind stealing our hats, both of us believing effort would become inheritance of character, not conflict. We arranged the windows to court the breeze, not invite trespass. I showed him how to hear lumber complain, how to respect weight. He showed me how easily a boy can promise forever. Promises, I've learned, are lighter than dust. They float until responsibility reigns. Still somewhere under the man who averted his eyes today, there is the boy who brought me nails because he wanted to help. I bury that memory deep next to forgiveness and keep building. It wasn't grand, but it carried the gravity of every hour I bled into fabric. I can still feel the salesman's doubt, how his smile tightened when he saw my worn shoes and simple coat. I counted out bills I'd ironed flat, watched his face shift from politeness to respect as the pile grew. That table hosted birthdays where we made cakes, tall with hope and thin with sugar holidays, where I placed the good plates I completed one by one. Month by month, it held elbows, arguments, homework, and apologies. A table is a courtroom and a church if you use it right. I chose oak because oak forgives slow but lasts long. Today, seeing a wet ring sweating into its top from some careless plastic cup, I felt a verdict rise in me. Anything won by discipline will not be surrendered to laziness. I will not let their impatience rewrite the cost I paid. Every room had its season and its secret. The kitchen pulls the morning light as if it were dough. The hallway quarrels if you stand in the center and breathe. The bedroom welcomes the ocean's whisper but rejects the storm's shove. I learned where to place furniture, so laughter pools, and where to set a lamp, so grief looks less monstrous. I chose the fabric that forgives spills and the color that flatters faces after long days. I stitched little anchors into the hems so they wouldn't tremble when the breeze flirted. This house is not just walls, it's choreography of steps of sunlight of mercy. When I saw beach towels bleeding into my chairs, cigarette stubs nesting in my planters, I realized vandals don't only swing hammers, they rearrange the air, make it coarse. But the map is still here in my head. I can redraw what they smudged. I always have. I always will. I decorated my borders with trust and never asked for passports at the door. I assumed love teaches manners and gratitude grows naturally, like mint aggressive and hard to kill. I thought marriage added hands, not knives, and that in-law meant in love, not in line for assets. Perhaps I confused silence with peace, endurance with harmony. Perhaps I forgave too quickly because I remembered too tenderly. Today, with music shaking my frames and strangers claiming my rooms, I learned a new geography's safety is not granted by surnames. It is defended by boundaries. You do not become unkind when you say no, you become lucid. And when someone calls you selfish for locking your doors, believe their translation, they are angry, your open door was their shortcut. The family should shelter against the weather, not the weather itself. I will build better roofs. I will train the storm in me to answer only when justice knocks. My fingers remembered each stitch, a quiet alphabet spelling out care in white on white, invisible to everyone except the one who made it. I had worn that apron on lonely holidays, letting simmering soups talk to me when people wouldn't. Seeing it on her felt like someone signing my name with a filthy pen. She sipped from my favorite mug as if heat bowed to her. Comfort fits you beautifully, I wanted to say, when someone else pays for it. Instead, I steadied my breath and took inventory the threadwork, the mug's hairline chip near the rim, the way steam ghosted her face. Sentimentality is a poor lawyer, but it is a sharp witness. The court in my chest wrote down everything. They think theft is only what you can pawn. They don't understand how disrespect strips rooms first, valuables second. I set the apron back in my mind's drawer and locked it. Evidence preserved, dignity intact. Laughter scattered across my floorboards, little knives clattering point down. Megan cocked her head as if humoring a confused tourist. Robert said we could use it, she repeated like a child practicing a lie until it sounds like permission. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the temperature of my resolve. The deed is not a bedtime story. It is ink and law and years. I let silence do the work rage wanted. In that silence, I measured them the way I measure fabric. How much slack, how much shrink, where it will tear at the first pull. No room, she added. There is always room for consequences. I tucked my keys into my palm until they drew tiny crescents of pain. Pain wakes, pain focuses. They wanted noise. I gave them memory. I walked my eyes around the room and quietly put everything back where it belonged, in a future where they no longer stand here. The easiest victory they could have had was my outburst. I denied them the spectacle. I walked past the children, not blaming them, past the women not bowing, past the balcony not bending. The sea exhaled like an ally. On the driveway, I paused long enough to take one picture of the license plates and another of the overflowing trash timestamps for later. My hands trembled, but only because I was shifting from sorrow into strategy. Dignity is heavier than pride. It takes both arms to keep it high. I slid into my car, closed the door on their music, and found the quiet where decisions hatch. I would sleep under a strange ceiling tonight, but tomorrow I would wake myself by name. They think they won because I retreated. Retreat is a verb generals use before they draw a better map. I have always known how to start over. I also know how to finish. Promises to others can wobble. Promises to yourself have knees of iron. I wrote a list on the hotel notepad photographs to take rooms to check items to confirm words not to waste. I called the bank to verify balances and blocks rehearsed the questions I would ask without shaking. I practiced saying owner out loud to remind my mouth that grief hadn't repossessed me. I set an alarm for dawn, the hour when truth looks least theatrical. I pictured walking in with my spine straight and my fear folded away like a scarf I refuse to wear. They would talk about family and sharing, and you barely use it. I would talk about signatures, receipts, taxes, and trespass. Tomorrow would not be loud. It would be legal. I slept like a soldier in a trench shallow alert, counting breaths because the morning would need a woman whose gentleness didn't confuse itself with surrender. The sound shamed the wood. Veronica answered in pajamas, eyelids hostile. What do you want now? Now I want the universe put back where effort left it. I said I needed my personal things and a conversation. She shrugged the way people do when they've practiced disrespect in mirrors. Inside the air smelled lived in by strangers, a cheap perfume arguing with yesterday's grease. My suitcases, my life in bags waited in the garage like abandoned pets. In the kitchen plates, I collected one payday at a time, or accidentally shattered history. Upstairs, unfamiliar bodies had colonized my bed. My closet reduced to plastic sacks. I felt the key in my pocket, like a relic from a vanished country. I was not confused. I was clear. Keys open doors until liars move in. Laws open them afterward. I asked for Megan calmly. The house laughed less loudly now. The house could sense the weather changing. So could I. They had written my life in black marker, misty, old clothes, random, as if renaming could erase value. My winter coat shared a sack with photo albums, lace pillowcases tangled with a box of thread that once kept our lights on. A mothballed smell rose every time I shifted a bag. The scent of disrespect pretending to be organization. Dust filmed the bicycle I taught Robert to ride. A smear of grease decorated the suitcase. I carried to his college move-in day. I crouched reading labels that lied, then tied each knot tighter, sealing them not as storage but as exhibits. If this was an evacuation, who decided the fire, not me? The concrete floor kept my knees cold, long enough to cool my temper. I took pictures. I counted bags. I wrote down words exactly as they printed them. Trash says more about a house than trophies do. Today, their trash told me everything I needed to know. Burnt grease glistened on the stove, like a bruise refusing to be wiped away by half-hearted swipes. The sink sulked under a mountain of plates growing their own weather. In the rubble, I recognized a shard from the set I finished over years, one plate per payday. A private parade of small triumphs. A stranger had used my best pot to cremate something sugary, and the caramel had turned to amber glass. A fork lay bent at the tine testimony to hands that force instead of tend. I could hear the old salesman's voice, "Good china is an heirloom." And then Megan's echo. "They're old anyway. Old is another word for endured." I braced my palm on the counter, steadying the grief that rises when history is handled like disposable cutlery. Kitchens remember women. Mine remembered me, and it recognized an invasion. I opened drawers to count what still obeyed my inventory. Not enough. Never again, I promised the stovetop. Kids were playing, came the answer a lazy wave, in the direction of laughter, as if childhood were a license to erase the dead. The tone was an apology. It was whether unavoidable indifferent. My jaw ached with the effort it took not to educate a grown woman about reverence. I pictured my mother's hands drying those dishes, the thin veins a script I've memorized. I remembered the rule we used them when life needed to be reminded. It could be beautiful weddings, graduations, the random Tuesday you survived something. Now they were shards under someone's heel, an heirloom recategorized as oops. Intent does not resurrect porcelain. Respect would have prevented its death. I made myself repeat the question plainly once more to hear the shape of what I'd lost. Another shrug. That was my signal the conversation had only one fluent speaker me, and I wasn't going to waste vocabulary on the willfully illiterate. 2 children had colonized the pillows starfish wide, while a woman's robe mine hung open over the chair like discarded skin. The bed wore the smell of unfamiliar shampoo and impatience. The blinds were tilted wrong, making the room glare when it usually glowed. My jewelry box sat open, its velvet mouth yawning at me, cavities where my mother's pearls once rested. I swallowed my name before it came out loud enough to wake the house. The trespass was not only physical, it was curatorial. They had curated a version of my life where I was unnecessary, a ghost permitted only to carry keys, not authority. I stood still until the room remembered me. Then I reclaimed it silently, one glance to the dresser, one to the window latch, one to the floorboard that creaks. I catalogued what had been moved, misused, missing. Sleep is innocent, theft is not. I let the children dream. I woke the consequences. Hangers dangled naked, small gallows left, after rushed hands stripped them. Sequins from a dress I wore to Robert's graduation glittered on the floor like false snow. Pockets gaped where fingers had searched for cash, for secrets, for shortcuts. They found none. They never do. The cedar blocks I placed to kindly discourage moths had been tossed into a plastic bag labeled trash, the irony so on the nose, it almost made me laugh. I smoothed a blouse back on its hanger just to feel order behave under my palm. Closets keep a timeline. Mine had been shuffled by someone who thinks history folds. It does not, it resists. I slid my hand to the back, pressed the panel where I keep what matters most, and felt it give, violated, not broken, not yet. I let rage rise to the door and stop there like a tide arrested by a seawall. I built myself not here, not now. The sentence landed in the hallway and was immediately mocked by slippers shuffling and a groan of she's sleeping. Adults don't nap through ownership. I repeated myself without decoration, letting the architecture of the words stand straight. I didn't plead, I didn't bargain. I requested with the authority earned by mortgages and taxes and years of not collapsing. The house noisy a minute ago began to listen. Even Veronica's eyelids fluttered like curtains that remember manners when wind changes. I have negotiated with landlords, insurance adjusters, and grief. I know how to pace urgency without spilling it. Now I added not loud, just precise. A door opened somewhere. The smell of coffee arrived like a messenger. I squared my shoulders and set my jaw in the posture my mother taught me. For difficult rooms, lift the chin, soften the eyes, steel the spine. I would speak plainly to Megan, and I would be heard. She draped herself in the house, as if it had grown for her, as if walls root for whoever talks loudest. The robe's belt trailed on the deck, picking up grit. The mug's rim kissed lipstick that would stain if I didn't boil it with baking soda later. She did not avert her gaze. Predators rarely do. I watched her weigh me the way people weigh weather will. This ruin our picnic? I let her see me taking notes with my eyes the robe, the mug the way her heel tapped my chair's leg like a bored metronome. Ownership isn't a snarl, it's an inventory that never sleeps. Comfort suits you, I almost said when someone else foots the bill. Instead, I held my silence like a camera and captured the scene. People mistake composure for permission. It is not. It is preparation. She would learn the difference soon enough. The phrase "old lady" tried to crawl under my skin and failed. My skin has weathered sharper words in quieter rooms. Permission cannot be borrowed second-hand like a shawl tossed over cold shoulders. My son is not the owner. I said steady, "I am." She rolled her eyes so hard, the horizon might have tilted. Family shares, she said, a slogan disguised as ethics. Sharing is a verb, two people choose, not a noun, one person steals. I asked where Robert was. Work always work, a convenient alibi that pays for her boldness. I filed her sentence under evidence ageism, entitlement collusion. Old lady, she called me. Old is not an insult here. Old is a credential. I have survived the kind of years that scrub your bones. I have read contracts. I have buried my husband and kept the roof anyway. She thought she could shame me into silence. She only announced herself to the law. Numbers bore them. Invoices insult them. Reality to them is negotiable if you pout long enough. I laid down the lineage of ownership the way a mason lays. Brick deed insurance county records receipts for every repair, from salt-rusted hinges to hurricane shutters. Linda huffed. Veronica filmed someone opened another soda with a hiss that sounded like contempt. "You don't even live here full-time," Megan sang as if to use a trumped title. I let the sentence sit between us until it curdled. "I pay full-time," I replied. Silence arrived late, but it arrived. I didn't need their respect to proceed. Respect is optional in conversation. It's irrelevant in court. My voice did not rise because I knew what the consequences would consequences. I pictured the file I could build in an afternoon. I pictured their faces under fluorescent lights that do not flatter lies. They thought they were arguing. I was already establishing record. Deadlines do more discipline than threats ever could. The sentence felt like a locksmith's click, the turn that changes everything. Megan laughed, of course she did, and Linda muttered something about family doesn't evict family. Family doesn't falsify either. Veronica's camera phone trembled, the first honest movement I'd seen from her. Even lenses get nervous when truth enters the frame. I gave them the clock, not a quarrel. 24 hours is a generous mercy and an efficient fuse. I set my terms not as theater, but as timeline. Collect your things, repair what you can, prepare for what you can't. I did not add or else. Adults understand the unwritten portion. Children will learn it soon. I turned away to prove my point. My back is not retreat. It is refusal to negotiate with nonsense. The ocean flung light across the floor. The house seemed to inhale. I exhaled a lifetime's worth of apologizing. They wanted a mother, not an owner, a guilt sponge, not a woman. You'd shame your family is code for we'd like immunity. I let the question echo, then I answered it with another. Would you steal from your own mother? I do not relish uniforms at my door, but I will not outsource my boundaries to their feelings. The law is not a stranger to me. It is a tool like a needle, small, sharp, precise, and indifferent to sob stories. Someone scoffed about airing dirty laundry. The laundry was already filthy. I was merely turning on the light. Robert's name hung in the air like a lifeline they kept yanking. My son is not a shield, I thought. He is a witness who must choose the truth he will stand beside. If calling the police is what it takes to teach a lesson, then class will convene on time. The laziness was camouflage, the mess a smokescreen. Underneath, I could feel a script isolate. The matriarch redefine, sharing degrade the artifacts, then move on the paperwork while she is exhausted. I recognize the choreography because I have watched con games on smaller scales. Borrowed tools never returned help that rearranges power debts repaid with accusations. My eyes sharpened until the room lost its blur. I stopped hearing their noise as conversation and started hearing it as evidence. Words like inherit we need, you don't use it, arranged themselves into a motive. My heartbeat slowed into a metronome I could conduct strategy to. I would not argue with actors who think the stage is theirs. I would change the theater, bank, lawyer, officer, notary. If they wanted to turn me into a stereotype, confused, grateful, pliable, they miscast the role. The only role I accept is owner, and owners when dispossession knocks answer with locks and law. The panel I designed to sigh open only under my palm had been bullied. The wood wore new scars, where impatient fingers pried instead of puzzled. Papers that normally sleep flat deed insurance receipts. The tidy spine of my ownership had been folded, creased, manhandled into submission. The texture of the deed had changed. It felt handled by someone who thinks ink can be argued with. I pressed it against my thigh to smooth it, as if my skin could iron out insult. That compartment was my last sanctuary, the quiet proof that I keep records like a sailor, keeps charts meticulous, redundant, weatherproof. Seeing it violated told me two things: they were desperate enough to hunt for leverage, and sloppy enough to leave fingerprints of intent on everything they touched. I breathed through the urge to scream, and instead counted documents intact. Yes, order disrupted, yes, resolve awakened, absolutely. I closed the panel gently. It still obeyed me. The language pretended kindness in her best interest for efficient management. The way a wolf pretends fur is a blanket. They'd summoned a number, a tidy sum, that measured my decades in tidy columns, structure, land fixtures view. I tasted bile. Appraisals can value square footage. They cannot calculate nights I worked until my back sang pain. The funerals I paid for in private, the birthdays I salvaged from overdrafts. Incapacity, it said, as if I forget my name. I underlined phrases with my fingernails, slow converting their euphemism to their actual meaning. Sees strip sell. Evaluation is a price tag. A mother is not merchandise. I slid the paper into a clear sleeve, evidence protected from the oils of my rage. The arrogance of thinking a form could outvote a life. They believed the law was a trick mirror. I would introduce them to the one that gives no flattering angles. Ink can be cowardly, but handwriting always betrays character. The hurry hooked in the J, the mean loop on old, the little victory curl at cause trouble. Trouble to them is a woman who reads. Just need R's signature was their creed. Reduce me to a mother on paper, inflate him to owner by proximity. Signatures are bridges or blades. They turn sons into thieves if you hand them the wrong pen. I photographed the note against a neutral background, the way curators do, so no one could claim context changed meaning. I imagined Robert's hand hovering over that line. Hesitating, I hope, because some boys never outgrow the memory of their mother's eyes. But hope is not strategy. I labeled the photo, dated it, and made a duplicate. They wanted to make me small enough to step over. I made their plan large enough to trip on, then fall. The pearls she left me, soft moons I wore on brave days, had slipped their thread like a final sigh. The gold watch my husband wound every Sunday sat absent, its indentation in the velvet, accusing the air. Silver coins, prayer thin, had been harvested by a hand that never knelt for their meaning. Jewelry is portable history. Thieves prefer it because it travels light and sells quickly. I touched the empty spaces as if fingertips could conjure weight. They could not, but they could memorize loss. I wrote a list with exact descriptions, clasp type. Maker's marks tiny scratches only I know by feel. Sentiment is not admissible, specificity is. I closed the lid, and the hinge groaned like an elder rising from a low chair. I hear you, I told the box. We will testify. Grief demanded tears. Strategy demanded phone calls. I chose the step that would return the most. The pattern clicked into spine, degrade the space, demean the owner, disappear, the proof then deploy paperwork that calls theft stewardship. It's a choreography older than my wrinkles, and just as obvious once you learn to read it. I let the shock flicker and die. Shock is a candle in a storm, useful only if you cup it. I needed floodlights. My house had been turned into a stage where I was scripted to exit. I refused the role. The air went thin, then steady, as if the ocean itself approved my decision to stop being gentle. I gathered myself the way I gather a hem before stitching smooth a line secure. There would be no bargaining, there would be evidence, and there would be law. And if they mistook my age for softness, they would meet the hardness that saved me, when softness would have drowned. I was done being surprised. I began being exact. So that was the engine under their scheme. A cheap lie stamped with a borrowed authority. Senile, she said once, as if repeating it could conjure symptoms. I stood behind the doorframe, not hiding, documenting. Every word was a bead on the string I would later pull tight. $50 to erase a woman's competence, to grease the skids of a fraudulent transfer. I imagined the clinic's flickering bulbs, the hurried signature of a doctor who sold his oath for a dinner. Rage rose, but not the kind that spends itself on yelling. The useful kind, the kind that slows your hands while it sharpens your mind. We just need R to sign, she laughed, and the laugh scratched the paint. $50 is what they think my mind is worth. I priced my next move higher, banks, affidavits, prosecutors. Let them keep the receipt. I would keep the recording that matters. Angles matter overhead for scope close-up, for texture timestamp in the corner, like a witness who never blinks. I shot the note on a neutral surface, the door jambs Primarks with a ruler for scale. The empty velvet slots in my jewelry box, the scorch pattern on the stove, the trash-bagged belongings labeled random. I narrated softly into my phone location. Item condition so the future me in a lawyer's office wouldn't have to rely on memory's mercy. Then I walked the perimeter outside, capturing tire tracks. Cigarette butts the sag in the geraniums. Evidence is not revenge. Evidence is rescue for the truth when it gets pushed down the stairs. I zipped the phone into my pocket and felt the comfortable weight of being prepared. People think age makes you slow. Age teaches you to work once thoroughly, so you never have to work twice. My case was already building itself. The cup steamed like resolve. I wrote headings the way I label pattern pieces. Bank lawyer police photos, inventory witnesses. Under each tasks in verbs that don't wobble, freeze print, call file, notarize, serve. I added a column for timelines because panic prefers open-endedness. I prefer clocks. I set reminders, emailed copies of photos to an address no one else knows, and placed the originals on a portable drive. I called my sister only to say I was safe. I did not invite pity into the room while I was outlining power. The list grew teeth, then became a mouth that spoke my morning for me. 8 a.m., bank 10 a.m., lawyer noon, police report, 2 p.m. copies. I laid out the suit that makes clerks look up when I enter. I ironed it as if smoothing fabric could pre-smooth outcomes. It can't, but it makes me stand straighter while outcomes bend. Alex greeted me by name the way professionals do. When they understand continuity is comfort, I slid my ID, my accounts. My reason across the desk with a steadiness that made the fluorescents hum quieter. We'll place alerts, he said, tapping keys that sound like locks clicking. We'll require in-person verification for any changes. We printed recent statements, highlighted withdrawals, circled the clean history that would make any incompetence claim ridiculous. I asked for certified letters stating I manage my finances not with flair, but with the boring excellence that keeps roofs on. Banks speak a language of risk. I answered in fluency. We added a note, no information to anyone other than me, full stop. He offered to notarize my affidavit of mental competence. I accepted, signing in a hand as legible as the day I learned cursive. Money listens when you speak precisely, so does the law. The paper felt like armor-thick, official, inconvenient to dismiss. It said who I am in the only dialect Megan respects documented. It didn't flatter. It verified balances, consistent management, absence of irregularities. Confirmation of my direct oversight. If anyone inquires, Alex said you have this, and I am available to confirm. I thanked him with the kind of eye contact that turns strangers into allies. I slid the letter into a clear sleeve behind the photos, and the deed a chorus of papers singing the same song competent solvent owner. Outside, I sat in my car and read it once more, letting the ink turn into spine. For years, I kept receipts because poverty teaches you to show proof. Today, that habit felt like prophecy fulfilled. I called the copy shop, ordered duplicates on archival paper because presentation is not vanity, it is persuasion. Then I pointed my tires toward the lawyer. His receptionist's voice had the crispness of a woman who knows calendars can be bent when the magic words are forged medical report. I summarized in noun's first deed. Trespass, fraud, theft, then added dates, names, and the phrase ongoing occupation that made her inhale sharply. 4 o'clock, she said. Bring everything. Everything was ready, because rage when harnessed is organizational. I gathered my folder photos in sequence inventory typed and signed timeline bullet-proofed bank letter, foregrounded like a commander. I texted myself the address, set 2 alarms, and rehearsed the clean version of my story. On the drive, no flourishes, no detours, just the spine. Green lights cooperated, as if the city preferred law to drama for once. I parked early and reviewed the note, the one that called me. Old lady, because you must keep the insult fresh, to keep your focus pure. Then I walked in on time and unshakable. Read for urgency, for stop for this far and no farther. First tab, ownership deed, taxes, insurance. Second, condition photos labeled and logged. Third, crimes note. Forged report references, missing items list with descriptions. Fourth, capacity bank letter, notarized affidavit. Fifth, contacts bank manager officer on duty. Neighbor who saw the cars arrive. I added a summary sheet on top 1 page. A judge could read in a minute and understand the whole play. Intrusion, degradation, intent, execution, remedy, sought. I slipped a pen into the spine and a spare flash drive into the pocket. My hands, which once pinned patterns to fabric, now pinned a family's scheme to the page. I closed the binder and felt it thud with the satisfying weight of work done right. When I stand before power, I do not bring emotion first. I bring order. Emotion rides behind, buckled in, ready to speak only when called. I began at the threshold and ended at the hidden compartment, laying each detail like evidence on a table neither of us could overturn. I spoke in dates and times and names, spelled the way the law prefers them completely. I described the apron and the mug because respect is a kind of property too, and the court should know how it was trespassed. I read him the note, just need R's signature, and watched his jaw set the way good doors do. I listed the missing pieces of jewelry, the smell of scorch on my stove, the labels on my life in trash bags. I repeated the phrase, $50 medical report, until it lost its shock and hardened into motive. He didn't rush me. He made me feel like time itself was on retainer. By the end, the story stood upright, spine, reinforced by facts instead of fury. Good, he said. Now we work. Thomas spoke like a carpenter, measure twice cut, once brace everything that will hold weight. Trespass, he said, tapping the statute number. Unlawful occupancy, immediate remedies available. Theft. He continued, circling my inventory with special concern for heirloom's sentimental value. Won't sway the court, but detailed description will. Then he slid the page to forged medical report, and his tone chilled. That's not only evidence of intent, it's a separate crime. The board will want to know, and so will the prosecutor. He arranged my photos as if building a wall. They could not climb over Primark's scorch patterns. Empty velvet. This is not a family squabble, he said. This is a coordinated attempt to dispossess a competent owner. Coordinated, he used their word against them. He underlined capacity on the bank letter and nodded once. We will teach them the difference between sharing and seizure. I felt taller by an inch. Ink traveled my name the way I've traveled my life, steady, legible under pressure. Thomas laid out the sequence, emergency eviction police report, for stolen property, complaint to the medical board notice, to the prosecutor's office restraining order if they tested the boundaries again. We move fast, he said. Speed is mercy for the innocent and terror for the guilty. He slid me a copy of each document, my red binder swallowing them, like a mouth that finally had teeth. I initialed the photo log, swore to the accuracy of the inventory, and signed the affidavit of capacity with the same hand they tried to cheapen for $50. Sleep if you can, he said. Tomorrow, punctuality is posture. I shook his hand with the firmness of a woman who has lifted more than paperwork. Outside, the evening tasted like wire tension current direction. I ironed my suit before bed. Ritual steadies nerve. I sat on the bed and looked at the photograph of Robert. As a boy, grass-stained knees, sunburned nose. The grin you can't buy back once pride mortgages it. Love is not a legal defense. It is a light you carry into rooms full of shadowed motives, and sometimes it flickers when truth needs steady electricity. I spoke my boundary out loud. I will not buy peace with my dignity. Then I rehearsed what I would not say. Please apologies the tender discounts mothers give to sons who should be men by now. If the bridge burned, I would not jump after it. I would plant a new tree on my side of the river and live under its shade. I folded the photo and placed it behind the bank letter. A private order of operations memory, behind proof, heart behind law. Grief knocked. I let it in, sat with it, then asked it to wait outside the courthouse. Uniforms announce a different weather, and the air changed the moment boots touched my deck. The officer greeted me as "Ma'am Homeowner," 3 syllables that put chairs back where they belong. The notary's briefcase clicked open like a small verdict. I walked in first, not to gloat, but to lead. Megan's playlist died mid-beat as if the music was ashamed of its host. The officer introduced himself to the occupants with the neutrality of a scale, then asked for documents. I set the red binder on my table. The oak took the weight, as if relieved to serve its purpose again. We will proceed calmly, I said, not to them, but to the room that remembered me. Calm is not softness. Calm is a weapon when wielded by the rightful. The notary uncapped a pen. The moment had arrived when the story stops being told and starts being recorded. I felt my spine align with the deed. Its ceramic mouth met the wood with a gasp, coffee bleeding across grain like a confession. She stuttered, but my husband and the officer asked the only relevant question. Is your name on the deed? The word no is small until it stands next to a badge. Panic is noisy. Truth is efficient. The notary began reading voice, even as if he were narrating a weather report. Today's forecast calls for consequences. Linda hovered outraged and uncombed. Veronica's phone started up like a reflex. Please stop recording. The notary said this is an official proceeding. Megan scanned the room for someone to save her from the reality she had curated. No one stepped forward. The children quieted because even they understand ceremony. I did not speak. I didn't have to. The house spoke for me through documents resurrected from their crumpling. Immediate, the officer repeated, and the adverb did its work like thunder doing punctuation. There's a dignity to paper that has done its duty. Crisp edges, stamps that once felt decorative, now roaring with authority. I pointed to the parcel number, the legal description, the payment history that does not flinch under scrutiny. The officer traced the sequence with his eyes and nodded. Owner confirmed. Those 2 words rehung every picture on my walls. Linda muttered about family, and I almost pitied how little armor that word provides when it's wielded against evidence. We'll log the condition, the officer said. I opened to the photo tab Burns Primark's missing items. Each labeled dated unimpeachable. The notary compared signatures. The curves matched mine like a mirror that doesn't lie. Megan tried on a new tactic tires. But tears are water, and paper survives water when it's laminated in law. I slid the documents back into the binder with the tenderness I reserve for things that protected me when people didn't. Authority changes posture. Veronica's hand, so steady when stealing moments, shook when told. The moment belonged to the court now. The officer's voice remained professional, no show. Just structure. You may collect personal belongings. not the owner's property. Linda opened her mouth to negotiate and found no purchase. Entitlement is useless on level ground. I almost told her where the extra trash bags were, then decided they could manage with the ones they mislabeled my life with. As they shuffled, the house sounded different, less triumphant, more temporary. Even the towels seemed embarrassed to be draped where they weren't invited. I took my place by the window and looked at the ocean, reminding myself that abundance still exists, that beauty did not collude. Behind me, drawers slid shut, zippers stuttered apologies, rehearsed and abandoned. Order had arrived not as a courtesy, but as a correction. I felt the room tilt back to true. He wouldn't meet my eyes at first, picking at his keys, as if metal could make decisions for him. I didn't want he began, and the sentence crumpled under its own cowardice. Want is not a defense when will has already signed attendance. I asked again slower so the words could bruise properly. You knew, and you let it happen. He nodded without nodding. A small collapse that used to be a boy, ashamed of breaking a lamp, and had become a man, ashamed of breaking his mother. Megan hovered, translating his guilt into anger on his behalf. The officer stood near enough to remind us that truth had a witness. I remembered teaching Robert to ride a bike, how letting go felt like faith. Today, letting go felt like arithmetic, subtract what betrays, keep what stands. He finally looked up. The face was my son's, the spine wasn't. I waited for his answer to become words. It wasn't a metaphor. I had the paper. He swallowed the way men do when they realize chivalry is cheaper than decency. It was just he tried, and I lifted a hand, just as the favorite adverb of people arranging harm into something palatable. I placed the petition where he could see his own ghost signature, waiting for ink. This turns love into leverage, I said. This makes a son into a stranger with a pen. Around us, bags rustled a soundtrack of retreat. He reached for the paper and then recoiled as if the ink might stain permanently. It would. That is how signatures work, Megan hissed in his ear about opportunities and future and children words that sound noble until you set them next to theft. Would you sign? I asked one more time, quiet, mercilessly clear. His silence answered. Silence can be a confession when the evidence already speaks. Age does not shrink a woman who knows what she owns. Officer, I said kindly. Note attempted disparagement of capacity during an official process. The notary's pen paused mid-air, then moved, recording. Megan tried to bloom outrage into a shield, but outrage wilts under paperwork. I have a bank letter attesting to my management. I added, placing it beside the deed like siblings who like each other. Robert's eyes darted between pages, searching for a version of the story where his ease survived my evidence. There wasn't one. She's confused, Megan insisted, but her voice had lost the varnish. Confusion doesn't collect timestamps, doesn't alphabetize receipts, doesn't arrive with the state seal. I didn't raise my tone. I raised the standard of proof in the room and watched theirs collapse. The officer nodded, noted. Megan discovered in real time that slander is a poor locksmith. Every door she rattled stayed shut. The line was a plank I laid across the gulf. He dug a last bridge, offered not from weakness, but from principle. There's only one side here with documents, with deeds, with a clean ledger, I continued. Stand where the ground holds. His face flickered. Boy, husband, father, debtor, all the costumes duty forces men to wear when character won't clothe them. If you sign that paper, I said, touching the petition with a fingertip, you aren't choosing her over me. You're choosing theft over law. You're choosing ease over honor. Behind him, boxes thumped like punctuation. Megan's breath came sharp. She knew what a man looks like when he hears truth press a bruise. He looked down. He began and found no sentence that could carry both his comfort and his conscience. Then don't speak, I said gently. Act. The room waited. So did I. The law already moving did not. The officer's watch might as well have been a metronome ticking dignity back into the walls. Zippers stuttered, drawers sighed shut. Plastic bags rasped across floors they hadn't earned the right to scuff. Voices rose and fell like bad actors missing their cues. Panic is messy, consequences are precise. I stood still so the house could balance itself on me. Every thump of a box was a period at the end of a lie. Veronica tried to hustle a lamp that wasn't hers. The officer's eyebrow lifted, and the lamp returned to its table as if it remembered its surname. Linda muttered myths about family until even she sounded unconvinced. Megan barked orders that slipped on the tile. 10 minutes, the notary announced, and the number landed with the authority of a gavel. I didn't gloat. I inventoried the air, clearing the rooms, breathing the ocean, remembering my name. Justice has a sound. Today, it sounded like leaving. His eyes were wet with a confusion he hadn't earned. He clutched a toy car, like proof he still controlled something. "Are we bad?" he asked, the kind of question that should never have to learn its own weight. "No," I said and meant it. Grown-ups made promises they shouldn't have and took things they didn't own. "That's not on you." I told him the sea forgives quickly, that if he listened, it would teach him about returning what you borrow. He nodded like boys do when they want to agree with a better world. Megan swooped in, heat in her cheeks, ready to accuse me of confusing him. "I'm unconfusing him," I said softly. "He'll remember who told him the truth." The car's tiny wheels rolled over my palm. I set it back in his hand. Children carry the shock of adult greed like a fever. I wanted his to break sooner than mine did. Veronica cornered me with a camera-ready apology and a suggestion. "Let's settle this quietly. No police, no court. We'll fix the mess." Fix is a seductive verb. It often means hide. "No," I said, and watched the word find its chair and sit. You can pay for repairs. You can return what you took. But you cannot purchase amnesty. Linda tried the old hymn, "Families shouldn't go to court. Families shouldn't falsify." Megan offered contrition shaped like negotiation. "We'll admit mistakes if you drop everything. Mistakes do not come with notaries and forged reports. I've cleaned enough stains to know the difference between a spill and a deliberate pour. Money can repaint walls. It cannot restore trust. Law isn't revenge. It's hygiene. We are washing this thoroughly. If they wanted mercy, they should have chosen honesty earlier. I chose a different mercy, accountability, which hurts now and heals later. Some diseases require real medicine, not scented wipes. The metal was warm from another hand, but it cooled quickly, remembering me. The notary logged the transfer of possession page after page, like a staircase leading home. The officer shook my hand with the plain respect of a person who sees paperwork match reality. Megan watched the keys like a gambler watches the last chip, and then the doors closed behind her like a sentence finally punctuated. Silence arrived, not empty, but clean. I walked through each room the way a captain walks a ship, returned from mutiny, checking lines, testing latches, speaking quietly, so the vessel knows it's safe to listen again. The oak table steadied under my palm. The curtains caught the breeze I had designed for them to catch. "We're back," I told the house, "and we're stricter." I set the keys on their dish, not a stranger's pocket, and felt my shoulders release a decade I hadn't realized I was carrying. Justice widened its net. The medical board moved with the kind of efficiency reserved for sins that stain institutions. The clinic's name on the letterhead looked suddenly shabby, like a cheap suit under courtroom lighting. 12 other reports surfaced, carbon copies of indifference sold for cash. I did not celebrate a man's ruin. I acknowledged the necessary pruning of a rotten branch. Megan's $50 had become the receipt for a career unraveling thread by thread. I forwarded the update to Thomas, who replied with a single sentence. I wanted to frame, "This strengthens everything." The word everything did work, a bouquet couldn't. It meant my competence, my claim, my credibility, my case. Integrity is not a halo, it's a ledger. Mine balanced, his didn't. I brewed tea, not champagne, and sipped it by the window where the sea congratulates no one, only continues. That constancy is its own verdict, lies wash out. Stone remains. The envelope was heavy with intention, the kind that doesn't flirt. The prosecutor's letter arranged my months into a few stern paragraphs. Counts, statutes, case numbers, dates, cold language, hot relief. I read it twice, then read it aloud to the quiet room so it could memorize the sound of protection. This was no longer a domestic quarrel fit for whispers. It was a matter for the record where future liars can trip over past consequences. I imagined Megan rehearsing a new script that didn't include triumph. I imagined Robert confronting a mirror that finally refused to flatter. I did not savor their fear. I savored the system working the way it promises to when you bring it the truth tidily dressed. I slid the notice into the red binder which had become a reliquary for my labor. The spine creaked satisfied. Outside, gulls argued about nothing important. Inside, my justice learned to speak in docket numbers. The locksmith arrived like a therapist with tools, listening to my story through tumblers and keys. We'll rekey everything, add deadbolts, install high-security cylinders. He said language that soothed more than sympathy. The technician mapped sightlines for cameras that would mine the angles even when I could not. We placed one where the sea enters the frame not to surveil beauty, but to anchor honesty. The housekeeper came with references thicker than some people's morals, and the gentle authority of someone who knows how to reset a space without erasing it. I signed each contract deliberately, the way you bless a place name. Date terms clear enough to hold in sunlight. Safety is not an apology for fear. It is a choreography that keeps dignity from tripping. When the last screw tightened, the door clicked with a new music, secure, not suspicious, firm, not afraid. I slept that night a little heavier and a lot kinder to myself. The attorney read the clauses neutral as a metronome, while I rewrote inheritance into instruction. The foundation I chose built scholarships for women who rebuild themselves after loss. Let the walls that saved me become tuition for someone else's escape route. It is not punishment, it is pedagogy. If my son wanted freedom from my money, he shall have it completely. The document's language was clean, no room for sentiment to sabotage structure. I initialed each page, then signed the pen skimming steady, as if the future approved. A witness stamped her quiet, and the notary sealed his certainty. I felt the house exhale, as though relieved to know it would not be bartered again under the banner of family. Love remains. Access changes. That is not cruelty. That is clarity. When I left the office, the afternoon had the crispness of a newly laundered shirt. I wore the decision like a well-fitted coat. Maybe one day it began as if time were a servant. We could send ahead to tidy our mess. He wrote of bills and pressure, and children of how mothers should understand. He did not mention signatures or schemes or the cheap price someone put on my mind. Apology is a currency that requires the right denominations. Ownership, specificity, repair. His total was short. Pride had written it. Fear had stamped it. I traced his name with a fingertip and felt both ache and relief. The ache of a door that might never open, the relief of not standing in a doorway begging. I placed the letter where it can't haunt my mornings, behind the binder beneath the bank letter under the deed. Love filed, boundary visible. If he ever speaks in the clear grammar of contrition, I'll listen. Until then, I refuse to rent my peace to hope that won't pay. The sky didn't forgive me. It made forgiveness optional. Gold rinsed the railing, and the sea organized itself into rows like a choir that knows every part. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt accurate, aligned with the woman who carried sand, who sewed, until the bobbin coughed empty, who refused to buy comfort at the price of self. Healing did not arrive with violins. It arrived as posture, shoulders, uncurled jaw, unclenched breath arriving without needing permission. I let the day unspool from my hands. Keys returned, papers sealed. Locks changed cameras, watching a future assigned to generosity instead of guilt. Somewhere a boy I raised struggles to meet the man he has become. That is his pilgrimage. Mine is simpler tea. At dusk, a book that doesn't lie, a house that keeps its word. I watched the light go, and nothing in me chased it. The dark came honest. I was not afraid. Love didn't evaporate, it decanted. What remains at the bottom is heavy and clear. The smell of sunscreen in Robert's hair after long summers, the fierce way he slept with one hand fisted in my shirt, the lopsided birthday cards he drew with planets and crooked hearts. That boy still exists somewhere inside the man who signed nothing and said too little. I do not rewrite what was good to justify what became cruel. I keep both the tenderness that built him and the silence that unbuilt us. Some nights I hear the clatter of Lego, not the clatter of arguments. I choose which sound to let through the door. Love, I've learned, isn't a leash or a ledger. It's a light you can set down when it burns your hands and pick up again if it softens. If he ever comes honest, the porch will still be here. But the lock finally knows my name first. I miss smaller things more than grand ones. The click of my husband's watch finding the nightstand. The bobbin's last dry cough before I rethread the way. Evening buttered the hallway walls when the oven warmed dinner. I miss the ritual of choosing the good plates for no reason except surviving Tuesday. Nostalgia can be a thief if you let it. It steals today's oxygen. So I let it visit, but not unpack. I dust frames, but I do not live inside them. I keep the stories lose the ache. The house helps it knows how to hold a memory without turning it into a shrine. It lets me change light bulbs without asking permission from ghosts. When I signed the will sending these walls to scholarships, I felt the past nod. The best way to honor what fed me is to feed someone else. Charity is memory turned outward love that refuses to fossilize, choosing to move and warm. I practice a simple liturgy, sweep, steep, read, rest. I sweep out sand and old arguments. I steep leaves until the water inherits their calm. I read books that don't lie. I rest without apologizing to anyone, least of all my fear. I open windows for the sea and close them for the storm. I answer the door for neighbors, not demands. I return jewelry to its velvet with a small bow, a private ceremony of repair. When I walk the perimeter at dusk, cameras blink their quiet promises. The locks hum their new music. I mail a donation and imagine a girl I'll never meet buying textbooks with the future my house helped fund. I slide Robert's letter back into its envelope and refuse to edit it in my head. Some endings are tidy only when you stop smoothing them. I am done smoothing. I am tending. The night arrives like a friend who learned my rules and keeps them. What I surrendered were illusions that love without limits equals safety. That forgiveness must mean access, that age must swallow insults to keep a table full. What I kept is firmer a deed that answers a lock, that listens a voice that doesn't audition for kindness. I kept the map of wind in these rooms, the skill to rebuild without begging the quiet that does not negotiate. I kept the power to direct my generosity where it multiplies good, not excuses harm. If longing limps through, sometimes I let it sit, feed it tea, and send it home before dark. The past may knock, it no longer owns a key. Should the family come with clean hands, I have chairs. Should they come with scripts, I have doors. Peace finally is not softness, it is a well-marked border with a welcome gate. I stand inside it unafraid and call this by its true name home.